curry favor from. The one-year lobby ban, even as a standalone bill, is a significant deterrent to the practice of vote buying and influencing for those officials on the verge of leaving office who may be simply looking for their next paycheck. These far-reaching bills provide serious solutions to prolific problems in our campaign finance system. This bill package alone may not be an end to the campaign finance corruption, but they are a strong step in the right direction. And I know none of you in your current positions right now created this state of affairs. You didn't break our system or the public's trust in government, but you are the ones who can repair it. This is your chance. I ask you not to waste it.
Thank you both for your testimony. We appreciate it. And I would now like to invite member questions. I believe Rep. Breen has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello to two of my favorite attorneys in the state. I have a question about the real-time enforcement. So right now there's a process in place that I know helps help us understand what might be a simple mistake, allowing people to rectify that mistake, and then there are obviously also more egregious violations. So my question is more of a practical effect on how this would impact the court system, specifically Ingham County here. How would this impact their caseload? Do they have enough judicial resources? Any idea on the practical effect this could have on court functions in order to, like, we don't even know how many cases this might bring. I just want to make sure if we were to go through this that they are able to carry through without affecting the rest of their caseload.
Well, thanks, Representative Breen. I think that's an important question to ask. I can speak from my standpoint as the Chief Election Officer and what I've observed from our Bureau of Elections, which is that the goal of greater enforcement power is twofold. One, to create a greater deterrent for violations, which I think would probably be the most immediate and significant effect, and then to, of course, provide greater enforcement teeth on the other end if there are violations. My prediction would be you'd see far less potential violations with this added enforcement power, which would, at the moment where we have relatively small major violations to begin with, that even if nothing changed, it would, in my view, create a great burden for the court system. My expectation is also any violations we do see might be deterred by the stronger legislation, leading us to not have to go to court to begin with to ensure greater enforcement.
Is that right? First of all, you're a little younger than me, Rep. Breen, so maybe you weren't practicing before we had the Court of Claims, but as you recall, all cases against the state virtually were filed in the Ingham County Circuit Court. And these cases won't take up nearly as much of the docket as that did, but somehow that was manageable. That wasn't changed because of the burden on Ingham County Circuit. It was changed for other, I would say, more political reasons. So I don't anticipate it to be a problem. But I will say what will be helpful to people is giving MDOS, giving the BOE that authority means that the secretary won't be in a position when someone is unresponsive to just be like, well, now it's a criminal case. She can look into it, decide, is this something that really just requires a civil fine and nothing more if it's a mistake, if it's just a small oversight, and if it's not really the kind of case that should lead to a criminal prosecution, she'd be able to do that. So I think it'd be best for everybody, and there'd probably be fewer people that would end up prosecuted and just, submitting to a fine.
One quick follow-up, if I may. So MRTS isn't the best thing in the world for people to navigate. I just want to make sure also that there's a pathway for people to keep handling simple mistakes, which often this is what they are, so that they can avoid anything going further down the path, just to make sure that there's still that pathway for the people who make simple mistakes, get the education that they need in order to avoid them in the future. Is that still going to be remaining intact?
I'm glad you brought up MRTS. It's the first time I've ever heard anything negative about it. No, I in fact, in my first month in office, I brought everyone involved in MRTS into my office and said, we've got to get rid of it and replace it. State contracts and other challenging elements of our wonderful bureaucracy made that process slower than I would have liked, but I'm pleased to say that this summer we will be replacing MERTS with a new program. So stay tuned on that. There will be more to come there, and as that evolution occurs and that upgrade and modernization, we'll continue to provide additional webinars and training materials to ensure people have the tools to comply. But I am very mindful of the fact that we should be doing everything we can to enable anyone who wants to run for office to do so. And the disclosure requirements, whether they be the existing ones or additional ones that we implement, should not make it more difficult. It should simply just make it easier for folks to disclose what is already happening. So in that regard, I think as the administrator, I want to continue work to make it easier and ensure the education is there. And then frankly, also, the more we can, on the other end, identify people who have gone on far too long in violation of the law. Some folks don't even realize it, but also because of our limited access to information about what's going on when someone's not filing something, or just even the ability to require that information be disclosed to us, that hampers our ability to really know how to best help someone comply with the law. So all of this is meant to essentially give our office more ability to ensure compliance with the law, to deter violations, to seek accountability when egregious flagrant violations occur, but also to help the vast majority of well-meaning public officials seeking to run for office do what they need to do to comply with the requirements.
Thank you, Rep. Representative Wagella, please go ahead.
Hi. Sorry. Thank you both for being here and for the work that you're doing. In regards to House Bill 5583, campaign finance is something that's really interesting to me because we don't have to file our reports, especially our pre-election reports, until 14 days before the election. Voting has already started. So I think we should talk about changing that date at some point. But point I'm making is, if there is a violation right now, can you talk a little bit about how long that process takes and how this might be somewhat of a remedy to that? Because in my view, the current system allows someone to commit a campaign finance violation. You wouldn't find out until people have already started voting, and then you wouldn't have anything resolved until after the election. So I think, like, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I actually think that's a really important point to think about as the patterns of voting have shifted to enable early voting. Perhaps the campaign finance disclosure requirements that currently exist should be adjusted accordingly, and I would encourage you all to consider that and look into that in the months ahead. In addition, it really depends on the level of violation. A vast majority of violations are found within a month or so of disclosure being found, and oftentimes it's something that was not disclosed that should have been, or a discrepancy like that. So there is some real-time-ish enforcement in that regard, but certainly the timeline and additional resources to the Bureau of Elections can help us increase the process even more.
I mean, I see a lot of complaints come your way that are earlier on before people start voting, because people, fortunately or unfortunately, people are running longer than they used to. They're having to set their sights on a particular race a lot further ahead of time than they used to, and forming a campaign committee. And so I think that there are lots of complaints that I see that voters would have plenty of time to evaluate.
All right. Thank you, Rep. Representative Kuntz, please go ahead.
Thank you both for coming today. I know we're in Lansing, and if there's ever a place in Lansing that we can rise above partisanism, it's in ethics and oversight. Everybody's for this. Help me feel better, especially on 5586. We have a similar bill that's been sitting for a year. How is this not a political, how are we not here doing politics when it should be playing ethics? The bill has been sitting, and all of a sudden it comes forward. Help me feel good about that, please.
Well, I'll just say this, Representative. I have been working on, in various ways, these types of policies for a long time, long before I became the Secretary of State. No matter who brings them forth, I will certainly support any good policy that enables more disclosure and transparency in our laws. I can't speak to the timing of why certain. I'm in the executive, not legislative branch, as my 7-year-old son often asks me as he's learning the branches of government. So I don't have the the ability to determine the timeline of when legislation is brought forth, and I don't have the ability to determine what other lawmakers and leaders may or may not do in regards to those policies. But I can say this. I can say quite firmly, I believe the Attorney General and I are in this fight for the long haul to ensure that we work to enable every person, regardless of their political affiliation, who wants to work with us for change to be a part of that change. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk on these bills today. But if there are other pieces of legislation that require hearings and attention and spotlight as well, would love to work with you about ways that we can enable them to be brought to further attention. And I'm sure Chair Burns, you would as well.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Rep. Kuntz. All right, I do have one question with regard to the revolving door bill. I know we touched on it briefly in your testimony earlier. Can you both just speak to us a little bit more about how you would see the passage of this bill really shifting the culture in Lansing to a more positive space, just based on your experience and what you've seen thus far?
So this is my 6th year here, same with the secretary, and we see it all the time. People who are really just positioning themselves for certain jobs they're going to take after they leave office. And it's very clear in some instances that they're not putting, the public first. They're not putting their constituents first. They're thinking about their next paycheck. They're thinking about their next job offer. And whatever they do, they don't want to upset whatever that particular organization or group is that they plan to go work for. And the fact that this would solve that problem, even just a year, would make a substantial difference, because I don't think anybody could count on something happening a year out. It's something different to say the minute I leave office, I'm going to work for a particular entity and hope that offer's still available in a year or not. One never knows. So I think it would just help not just the transparency part, but the motivation of how members vote.
And I'll just add as well, I came to this job from law, but also teaching and education, like others here. And it's not lost on me that we not only serve the public, but we are an example to those who will come next. And in recognizing that, we have a responsibility, particularly when charges come to light. Now, there have been several charges that have come to light over the last several months among various different incidents. But when something as egregious as what was revealed this week comes to light, there has to be action, or else we risk sending a message, not just to current citizens who are tasked with holding us all accountable, but future lawmakers as well, that this is something that may garner a few headlines, but then will be swept under the rug yet again, and others can continue to potentially do similar things. What we now have is an opportunity to draw a strong line in the sand and say, this isn't okay. The laws that enabled this are not okay. They are not sufficient to prevent something like this from happening again. And even if you do nothing other than ensure that the types of personal enrichment and abuse of authority and use of the public office for personal gain doesn't happen again, that if you can ensure and pass laws to prevent that type of behavior from going and send a message to everyone, past, current, and future, that it's not okay on your watch to do that, as the Attorney General has done and as we have sought to do in many ways, then I think we will have succeeded in working to begin to restore the public's trust in all of our work together in this town and in this state to ensure truly that government does work for the people.
Thank you both. Are there any other member questions for our Secretary or AG? Rep. Hoskins, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Chair, and thank you both for your testimony. And I actually kind of want to piggyback on what you both just talked about with the revolving door, because the issues that you have are very much some of the issues that I have as well. But I have a question, and I'm not sure if this is something that actually happens in practice, but I think that sometimes when we're thinking about the revolving door and going to become a lobbyist, We sometimes are thinking about all the worst case scenarios. We're thinking about someone going and, setting themselves up, as you both kind of articulated, setting themselves up for that job. And I'm thinking also, as we're talking about someone going to lobby, I'm sometimes thinking about two different types of organizations. Lobbying for a nonprofit, if I take, let's say I work for an LGBT organization and an LGBT nonprofit who genuinely needs like help with getting funding or some policy through or something like that, maybe they can't afford to have me be something else, or not be their government relations person for a year, be their lobbyist for a year. But I think we sometimes think about the big corporation or something like that when we're thinking about this, who can afford to have me be something else potentially for a year. And I'm just wondering if there are any thoughts around that. I don't want to harm smaller organizations that we think are doing a quote unquote worthy job or good things in the world. I would hate for them not to get the experience of a potential legislator or former legislator, and an organization that could afford to do that. I'd hate for them to get that and not the worthy nonprofit or other organizations. I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
I think it has to go for every stakeholder out there, whether it's a nonprofit that some of us deem to be very worthy, or whether it's a corporate entity that is just looking out for its bottom line. The fact of the matter is it creates the specter of impropriety. And when you are sitting there and you are potentially voting, or in my case, potentially pursuing or not pursuing certain either criminal or civil litigation, and then you immediately go to work for whoever that entity is, I think that the public loses trust and faith. And isn't that paramount above all of these other interests that you've talked about? Yes, there is that sacrifice, I guess, for those types of organizations for a year. But isn't it more important that the public have faith in the process and the work that we are doing while we are in elected office, while we were here in Lansing?
And I'll just add also, I think what in my view, the interest that this bill is seeking to serve, and the conflict it's trying to avoid, is just as it would be egregious for someone to say, "I'll give you $100,000 to vote for this bill." It's similarly an affront to basic ethics guidelines for someone to say, "I'll give you a $100,000 job after your term ends in January if you vote for this bill." And that's what we're trying to avoid, right? And so I think if there's ways to finesse the language of the bill to more narrowly tailor it to that particular issue, I would leave it up to the drafters to look into, because we also do want to recognize the expertise, or I would say you also do want to recognize the expertise that one develops, or perhaps just the policy interest. I think there's also lots of organizations and work that one could do post-legislative career that don't involve lobbying, but that perhaps enable that expertise to be shared either with an organization or an institute or an educational institution. So but I think this is all food for thought as you think about how to get at the problem that the legislation is trying to solve, which is to eliminate the potential for quid pro quo corruption through the offer of jobs in exchange for the passage of legislation or advocacy for legislation.
And rest assured, Rep. Hoskins, if you go to work for the LGBTQ community in a nonprofit, there are no $100,000 jobs. So.
All right, thank you, Rep. We appreciate it. A last call for member questions. Yes, Rep. Harris, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for being here. In relation to the cooling off period, this 1 year, would you be supportive of increasing that at all?
I would, yes. I think you might want to balance and narrowly tailor it, as I was talking about earlier, in a way that enables a greater time period. I think 2 years has been considered. Greater years for those in leadership have been considered. So I think you can continue to look at all of those things.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rep. Any other questions for our Secretary and AG before we let them go about their day? All right, seeing no further questions, thank you both so much. We appreciate your expertise. Thank you for being here. Of course, thank you. All right, so we will now have Representative Breen take the gavel. We are going to begin testimony for myself and Rep. Hope on our 2 House bills up today. So the committee will go at ease so we can make that switch.
You didn't bang the gavel when you went at ease, so I just banged it twice to bring us back.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Let us proceed.
All right. Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. Feels strange to be on this side of the table, but good to see you all this morning. And I'm here with my colleague, Rep. Hope. I'm here to begin testimony on House Bill 5583, which allows for the Bureau of Elections to petition the Ingham County Circuit Court for an injunction